Good morning, the Bromfels in the 35 corridor. I'm D. Lee Edwards here, the host of the Real Deal Real Estate Show. And today's special guest is Jeff Jewell, Director of Economic and Community Development. And we're going to be discussing business growth and development, workforce housing, and a few other things that might be of interest to you. But first, it's time for the New Braunfels Title Market Report. Today, we're looking at our home base in New Braunfels, and sales have pulled back a little in the last 30 days. 390 homes sold in the last 90 days and 114 in the last 30. Still, those are good numbers. In fact, very similar to this time last year. A little bit behind 2021, though. Availability rose to a new high. 596 homes are on the market in New Braunfels proper. 2 under 200,000, 66 from 200 to 300. That's the highest number we've had in about a year. 178 homes from 300 to 400,000, 110 from 400 to 500, and 242 homes over 500,000. The rental inventory continues to rise to 153 homes on the market for rent. That's good news for renters. And what's even better news is there are 76 homes that have now dropped into the $1,500 to $1,950 range. That's the good news. The downside is there's only 9 homes under $1,500, and there's 68 homes over $1,951. Interest rates took around a 300 basis point drop this week. That's good news for borrowers. 30-year conventional was down to 7.07, down from 7.38, and 15-year at 6.45, while FHA came in at 6.67. The bond market had a little vibration this week with the 91-day T-bill up a hair to 5.34, but the 2-year Treasury yield dropped a hair to 4.888, and the 10-year was at 4.098. The Fed announced that key indicators of inflation came into target of 4.2. This may be a signal that a holding pattern on rate increases could come about, or a slight addition just to hit us one more time for effect. We'll see what the attitude is next month's meeting. West Texas Intermediate oil rose to $83.22 a barrel as consumers' usage exceeded expectation, whereas industrial was below forecast. Now, this is another reason that the inflation numbers could subside if industry and manufacturing continue to pull back. The counter to that is if oil rises to, say, $88, $90 a barrel, you will see that number start to come through all the transportation contacts and more. Mortgage apps up nationally, which may say that the numbers in 30 days could show increases. Love for numbers to be more stable than volatile in that area. Job growth is showing signs of waning. 177,000 added new jobs last month, well below expectations. Part of that could be that we've got seasonal employees that were just backed off. Now, the world must not be too bad as whiskey sales of companies like Brown and Forman, Jack Daniels, declined. See, when times are hard, we drink a little harder. And so this could be a whole new indicator of how the market is. Anyway, Jack Daniels sales are down a bit. Now, Mike Winters, he did some analysis of what you need to make as a single person in every state in the union. In Texas, it says for a single person to be able to have a basis standard of living, you need $51,000 a year in income. I think in metros, it's probably a little higher. In New Braunfels, it's certainly true. In 2023, the San Antonio and New Braunfels combined numbers for singles was at 51,000. That would have put them at 90% of the AMI. That's a tough spot to be in. The problem here is we have a lot of folks at 38 to 44,000 as singles, and the qualify for rental at 3 times, 51 won't cut it. You need 54,000 to qualify for, $1,500 a month. And if you're looking at $1,900 a month, you need 68,000. So some of you singles going to have to work a little harder or get a sweet friend. Now, what was down this week? Yep, on Friday, our Dow was down to 34,868, but that was still ahead of last week. S&P was at 4519, up 150 points, and the NASDAQ was up a hair to 4519. Unemployment rose in August to 3.8% for the first time in a good time. And look for those numbers to head back down as we get into November, where we lost the seasonal summer employees. We will now pick up employees going into the holiday season. Mommies and daddies? Yep. Well, school started back. Guess what? So did paying college debt. It started back today. Again, the head buffoon. The President of the United States is requesting that Congress come up with short-term funding bill to keep the government running because it's running out of money. It's borrowed money again. Can you say drunken sailor? And neither side of the aisle is doing anything to curb it or control it. So real estate sales are down the last 30 days. Inventory up, rental inventory up. Surprising, a big number and under the 1,950 was good news. Bonds up and down, interest rates down, oil up, stock market up for the last week. Deficit going up and away. Unemployment up, new job creation down, Jack Daniels down. Gosh, I guess I have to go have one. And what you need to live in the Braunfels is up and going up more, even with home prices coming down. So it was an up and down kind of week. Look at similar issues next week, and that's the real deal for September 2nd, 2023. Now, don't go away. We'll be right back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show with our special guest, Jeff Jewell, Director of Economic and Community Development. But first, a few words from our sponsors. You're listening to the Real Deal Real Estate Show on KGMB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM. And we're back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show, and our special guest is Jeff Jewell, Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of New Braunfels. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Lee. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Hey, fabulous. It's a sunny day, and maybe it won't be over 104. So, as a reminder to our listeners, this portion of our show is brought to you by Meyer Heating and Air Conditioning, keeping you comfortable all year long. So, Jeff, tell us, what does your job entail?
Thanks, Lee. The Economic and Community Development Department works to expand the city's tax base, support job growth, support policies and initiatives that grow a healthy housing market, and promote enhanced fiscal sustainability throughout the city of New Braunfels. We provide also professional, analytical, and administrative support to the New Braunfels Economic Development Corporation, better known as the 4B Board.
Great. Now, what are some of the initiatives that y'all are working on at the city and in your department, both from the housing standpoint and for the economic development standpoint?
Sure. Well, a lot of our work in reality is very cross-departmental. We really engage across the entire city organization, from transportation capital improvements to our planning and development services department to the New Braunfels National Airport. We try to undertake our mission through a series of activities that are really focused on policy, so supporting strategic initiatives and policy advancement that help support and advance the mission of the city and of the Economic and Community Development Department. We also focus on our downtown. Downtown is kind of, as everybody knows, and everybody that's been around in New Braunfels knows, that our downtown Main Street is kind of the jewel of New Braunfels. And so supporting initiatives that help continue to grow and expand that place's economic and cultural relevance and importance in our community is also some of our activities. We also, I did mention the New Braunfels National Airport. We also support and work with the staff over there to identify funding opportunities to attract and grow corporate aviation as well as our general aviation sector here in New Braunfels. Specifically with respect to housing, we work pretty extensively with a citizen-appointed board, the Workforce Housing Advisory Committee, to try to understand what the housing issue is here in New Braunfels and try to develop policies and tools to try to bring forth greater solutions to a broader set of the workforce and the affordability challenges that they face.
A lot of that being free market, having policies that allow free market to be able to carry some of that burden, or some kind of subsidies or assistance to help free market carry the ball. Is that right?
I think broadly, a lot of the activities that the Housing Advisory Committee have focused on, we focus on basically three pillars, which is production. So trying to figure out how to get units on the ground. Housing is a market just like any other good, that
Right.
as supply is constrained and demand stays the same or goes up, prices go up. We've seen that in New Braunfels for really quite a long time now. We've been following this issue for quite a long time. But so trying to figure out ways to add more production, preservation, the cheapest unit is the one that's already on the ground. So trying to identify where those units are and tools and policies that we can deploy in order to keep those units from continuing the upward escalations that we have seen, or working with owners to identify and preserve the affordability of those units.
You've been working closely with Gene Drew and the planning department on land development ordinance in order to remove some barriers to help that sustainability out of existing project, right?
Yeah, that is correct. The 2018 comprehensive plan, kind of known better as Envision New Braunfels, really gave a roadmap for some strategies that we needed to try and study and try to implement with respect to housing specifically. There was also another 2018 workforce housing study that was done. And basically both of those studies had recommended was that the city really needed to identify barriers to different types of housing, expanding kind of the palette of what was being offered in New Braunfels, and identifying regulatory barriers that discourage that or put up roadblocks to those kinds of different housing types from happening.
Like ancillary housing, or using ancillary buildings to be converted and still not activate it being an R2. And those kind of things, which was some of the argument. Right?
Yeah, I mean, everything from accessory dwelling units, which is just an additional unit, typically somewhere between 400 to 600 square feet on an existing lot, but that serves as a kind of a single room occupancy or an efficiency unit from somebody, to small apartment complexes,
Right.
up to 4 units to 12 units, kind of small scale multifamily, because really, in reality, there's a whole spectrum of housing that exists actually in New Braunfels if you look carefully enough. But that there's lots of different housing types beyond just what we have seen historically in New Braunfels, which is kind of the single-family housing development and the large-scale garden apartments. And in reality, there's a whole variety of everything in between that.
We're speaking with Jeff Jewell of the City of New Braunfels Community and Development. So some of the things that we may be looking at as we're talking about workforce and accessibility to housing and the LDO and those kind of things are tiny homes, cargo container kind of things, removing some barriers or putting them, or just providing definition of what those are so that they can be implemented, right?
Yeah, some of the low-hanging fruit is just adding certainty to what can and cannot be done. There's some gray areas in different housing types. It's also, I think, drawing a brighter line between kind of small scale housing development and larger scale housing development. Our code, for example, does not really differentiate in terms of commercial building and multifamily standards and kind of all the requirements that go to that. If somebody wants to build 3 units in a building versus 300 units in a building. And so drawing a brighter line between those different scales of housing is something that we're also trying to identify. as well as trying to, as I mentioned, lower barriers to the different housing types.
Well, and we've had a real problem in the last 20 years. A couple of things got passed that altered how we were doing on fourplexes, so we lost that whole battery for a while. And then this is trying to come back to where we can pick up those infill fourplexes, eightplexes that add to the model, but in diversified neighborhoods instead of being in these consolidated apartment zones, right?
Yes, that's and really we're trying to address a need that has really been percolating in New Braunfels for quite a while. You know, when you talk about housing affordability, you always kind of talk about you talk about kind of a multiple of the median income for a particular family relative to the kind of the housing price. So, for example, 10 or 11 years ago, back in 2012, the median housing price back then was about just under 3 times the household income here. 10 years later, it's actually more than 4 times that. So that's a pretty significant increase. And so that's kind of the facts and the data on the for sale sign. On the kind of on the rental side, there's a significant population of renters, folks that are housing cost burden in our renter households. More than 50% actually of folks in rental households are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And just something else that I think is very interesting in New Braunfels is that, I mean, you know that typically multifamily is kind of classified in different categories, classes A, B, and C. And that kind of speaks to the different amenities and the features, typically the age, the size of the units, kind of the quality of the units, with A being kind of the top in that market and C being kind of the bottom. And what's really interesting in New Braunfels is that there is effectively no real differentiation between the average rental prices for Class C versus Class A. And to me, that speaks to really what the overall demand is, because people are looking for housing units because there are so many people that are moving here, and we all know the story of growth.
Well, and here's a little another tidbit, and good to take back to the city while you're in this planning process. All indicators are looking at if the interest rate flatlines for the next 90 days, then in 2024, we're going to see the interest rates start to pull back. And by 2025, the interest rates will be back somewhere between 1.5 and 2 points, which is a significant number. Now, the prognosticators that we work with, we just came back from California talking to some of those guys, and then some out of NAR and Chicago and New York, they are anticipating if we avoid a crash or a black swan that takes us into something else, that 2025 will be the biggest year in real estate in history. And they're really confident that that's going to occur. First of all, we got a pent-up demand of 3.5 million people who want homes in the U.S. That 2-point drop puts them in the fives. That means it's right where historically the 5.5 is a really good number in interest rate. There'll be another year or so of increasing wage to go with it to help in the median. And if the supply chain returns to normal at the same time, you've got the perfect trifecta, as long as we don't have a lot of obstructions to get that material on. So to go with that, in the last month and a half, most of the major builders are now back in a land acquisition mode, playing for 2025. And so that'll have some impact on what y'all are talking about and trying to do.
That makes sense. I mean, as you know, real estate projects take, as you know, long time to get into a pipeline, into a pre-development phase. So it would make sense that folks are starting to acquire property now for a 25 build. Yeah, definitely. At least on our side, and you were talking about some market stats here in the New Braunfels area, and inventory, days on market, closed sales. I mean, all of those stats are definitely down from where they were. I'm sorry, well, except for inventories, obviously up, but sales are down. Days on market are up From
down
what we
about
saw,
16% on the sales number. Overall, generic.
from what we saw last year, at least, on the city side, definitely kind of the single family residential permitting is also kind of following that trend. That's primarily from interest rates, but we've seen projects at least be shelved temporarily. That's a function of the interest rates, but it's also a function of that there's just so much more development that's happening actually outside the city of New Braunfels limits now.
And when you talk about that in particular, the issue becomes for City of New Braunfels, Green Valley, Spring Hill, Seguin, Crystal Clear. If we're expecting a surge in 2025, if you're not putting plans in place to get that infrastructure ready for it, you'll be caught flat-footed. Now we're talking about dragging stuff out to 26, 27, and it'll drive the prices back up. What's been fueling the housing market has really been the new construction, because we really haven't had a lot of old inventory coming on because it got great interest rates. So they're holding those right now. So what else is going on with you? I mean, we got workforce housing and that committee. There's some projects you're looking at that further. If there's anything you want to talk about, or on the commercial side.
Well, sure. I mean, one of the initiatives that the Workforce Housing Advisory Committee kind of formulated in their plan that they presented to council at the end of 2022 was the establishment of what we're calling kind of high-level workforce housing incentive fund, which is basically a fund that is dedicated to providing assistance in a variety of forms, kind of financial or non-financial, to targeted populations that the community identifies through that planning process. And so
those that are spending more than 50% of their income on housing.
About 42% of our workforce here in New Braunfels is below the kind of the threshold to be considered kind of what's low income, which is 80% AMI and below. So we have a pretty significant portion of the population here that works throughout the community, fills important jobs really throughout the community, provides important services and goods to all of us here in New Braunfels, that really kind of struggle to find a place to live that's quality, or a place to live that's relatively affordable to them. We've talked in the Workforce Housing Advisory Committee about kind of the benefits of having adequate supplies of housing and a broad set of affordability in your community, because it really kind of leads to better outcomes for everybody. Right. Families have better economic mobility options. Children have better educational outcomes. There's actually more tax revenue that gets collected because there's more disposable income. So there's a whole set of policy reasons why communities pursue housing solutions.
Stable housing, stable families.
Yes.
Stable schools, stable economy. It all goes hand in hand.
And we're also working from the assumption that this is something that the community has identified in previous planning processes.
Right.
That study I mentioned from 2018 was actually commissioned by the New Braunfels Economic Development Corporation, that really identified housing as a challenge for its employers. Just anecdotally, I hear from employers that that are trying to identify quality workers that don't have to travel so far. There's a lot of transportation risk that's associated that
right.
really creates instability in employment, and so the business community, I think, is interested in this idea. And so also in Envision New Braunfels, it really talked a lot about affordability and striking a balance of housing options that were affordable to a broad set of the population. So that's really the predicate from which we're building a lot of these policies on, and working with our Housing Advisory Committee as well as the City Council.
I think you've made a lot of progress. The committee has. They've got some plans that are going to be coming before council here in the near future, along with some things that y'all been working on transportation and others to help solve. And it's really a mosaic or a jigsaw puzzle at trying to get this thing to move, because it's a big machine trying to get there. How can people get a hold of you, because we're out of time, and discuss more about your projects, or a website where they can see some of the things going on?
Well, I mean, if you want to go to our website, our department webpage is actually at newbraunfels.gov under Economic Development. Our office number is 221-4621. I'm always available via phone, and then our emails are also on that website.
Jeff Jewell with the City of New Braunfels and Economic and Community Development. We really could have gone on for about an hour or so with the things that are going on here. I think people need to know that the city is making efforts in certain tractions to find things and create some solutions and get something started in the next year or so that can move us forward from rhetoric to action. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Lee. I had a nice time.
Well, thanks. And now, folks, stay right there. We'll be right back with Lee's Hot Picks of the Week. You're listening to The Real Deal Real Estate Show on KGMB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM. And we're back on The Real Deal Real Estate Show, and it's time for Lee's Hot Picks of the Week. You're listening to The Real Deal Real Estate Show on KGMB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM. Now, we've got that special sauce from Bubba's, right? And then we've got Bubba's Backyards he's one of our sponsors for this, but I've got some special sauce and some hot deals for you today. First up, 672 Cross is one of the finest restorations I've ever seen. This classic mid-century home in the path of development and revitalization is impeccable. From the unique midpoint door known on the front door to the elegant hardwood floors, brass floor registers, the bathrooms are stunning. Their classic charms, the colors, the vibrance, the updated kitchen has all the creature features and loads of light from many, many, many windows. Now, throughout this home gives you a feeling of returning to a bygone era, like growing up with Betty White. The spacious patio, fine garden, and wonderful high fence all add to the experience of stepping back in time. All of this in 2,208 square feet. Its home is a detached garage, bonus office space, and a quarter of an acre near downtown. All in a historic fashion of $874,900, $396 a foot. We give it 3 jalapenos. It's about $30 under some of the historic prices out there. Now, next up, 450 Walnut Heights has had a recent price improvement to $375,000, located close to schools and shopping, making it easy to live for all ages. You got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a full office and flex space, updated lighting, kitchen, spacious yard, fresh paint, making an excellent 2 jalapeno deal at $375,000 or $206.95 a foot. That's 1,812 square feet full house. 2140 Dorman, offered by Katie Forrester or Keller Williams, is a 1,652 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-story home in Avery Park. Wood floor planking, making maintenance easy. Open floor plan, well-maintained carpets in the bedrooms, plenty of closet space, plus a large back patio and fenced yard. Now, all of this for only $166.46 a foot, or $275,000. And it gets 2 jalapenos. Now, for these and other great deals, go to DealeyEdwardsRealty.com and search the entire MLS or call 830-620-7653. That's 830-620-SOLD. Now, join us next week as our special guest will be Councilman Larry Spradley of District 4. We're going to be talking about city budget projects and concerns out there. Join us next Saturday at 10 a.m. on KGNB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM for the Real Deal Real Estate Show. Don't forget great guests, economic insights, and real estate news. Till next Saturday, I'm Dealey Edwards for the Real Deal Real Estate Show saying good day, New Braunfels, and good investing.